All right, welcome back to the show. So today we're going to do something just a little different. Today, I'm going to give you a quick synopsis of these 20 or so books. We have an episode on pretty much every one of them. There may be a couple in there that I didn't do an episode on, so I'll reference many of those. But for any of those that may be looking for a new book to read, some good suggestions. I wanted to recap a few of these, tell you what each one is about, and kind of my opinion of the book. And actually, every single one of these books is one that I read and enjoyed and found quite impactful in my own life. So not just books I've read and thought, "Hey, that was cute," but books that had a real impact on my life. So let's get started because we got a lot to get through. So first one is called Raising Lions by Joe Newman. So the art of compassionate discipline. Essentially, this book is about raising children with a very strong personality, and they're no pushovers, right? Kids that want sort of to run the roost. And a lot of times, if you give them too much power, that turns into anxiety, and that can last throughout life until they sort of understand that they are not the center of the universe, and that uh, they do have some power, but they need to respect and be responsible with other people's opinions and time and etc. So this book is filled with strategies on how you should parent or coach or teach children with very strong opinions, and that's who he calls lions. Are those children that are kind of unusually self-driven or challenge the authority, right? So very interesting book on raising children. I think it applies to your typical healthy child as well, and any parent should read that book. Number two, Helping Children Succeed by Paul Tough. So, what works and why? Paul Tough, he's written several books, but essentially he has spent his career trying to understand the gap between high achieving children and low achieving children in schools. And in this book, he talks about many of the things they've tried and studies done to understand why that gap exists. Now, that gap is very clearly cut between a socioeconomic status, but it's not about the money. It's about the engagement and support that children have at home. So, when parents are present and able to support their children and have books in the home and read to them and are responsive to them and encourage them and support them in their activities and just show up and be present, those children have a self-esteem that exceeds the others. They feel this value, self-worth, ability. The risk of failure is not as great. All these things, they feel like they fit in and they do well. And the children that don't succeed are lacking that support at home. And so Paul Tough is looking at ways that we can coach parents or even improve the way teachers sort of take that role in some degree, or other solutions. So interesting book, also very applicable to any parent, and how you can support your child in the things they do. So these kind of progress from parenting to personal development to sales to finance, etc. So they're kind of ordered in a way that makes some sense. So 12 Rules for Life: An Antidote to Chaos. This is Jordan Peterson's book. He's a clinical psychologist, very famous on YouTube, and has been interviewed on a lot of major TV networks. Jordan Peterson, essentially, this book is saying, if your life is chaos, if you're stressed, if you're depressed, if there's something, really amiss, he basically says, like, clean your room. How are you supposed to understand what is helping you and harming you when everything is mixed up and messy and nothing's in its place? So clean your room first, get that in order, then get the rest of your house in order. Then stand up straight and walk with your shoulders back and look people in the eye and start to act as if you mean something and you're valuable, and what you have to offer the world is positive. And slowly, you through these small steps and changes in your own life, you begin to kind of get your stuff together, and many of those symptoms of depression and anxiety and things like that will subside, at least to some degree. Very in-depth book. This book is filled with Very detailed principles. So the titles of his principles are actually quite entertaining and funny. Uh, but then it's like he goes back to the great philosophers of centuries and centuries ago, even thousands of years ago, and he'll talk about multiple different cultures and symbolism and all this stuff. So he goes very deep on every single chapter. Next book. This is written by an acquaintance of mine, Ryan Mickler. It's called Sovereignty: The Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Men. Now, you may find this a little bit controversial depending on where you stand, but clearly we have this kind of woke culture and a lot of progress being made in the way we kind of view people of, different, uh, who identify themselves different ways, right? And I think most people are kind enough to just say, okay, you're born a male, you want to identify a female or vice versa or whatever. I will respect that for you if that's what you want. However, the discussion gets a little less cordial when we start talking about policy and should these transgender people be in sports and should like all these different things, right? Well, Sovereignty and Ryan Mickler, he runs the Order of Man podcast. And the whole thing is basically helping men become strong men, helping men embrace their masculinity, become providers, protectors, presiders in their home, serving their communities, owning all their own crap, and being responsible as a man in your community. And so, I thought it was a good book. This basically tells his personal story of kind of his life falling apart in some ways, and then when he sort of clicked, like, I'm giving too much power to all these other things in my life and not accepting responsibility. And once he started to accept responsibility and improve himself and went on this journey, and he kind of made it all public through his podcast and his book and things like that. He's done some amazing things with the community. So next is The Art of Possibility, Transforming Professional and Personal Life. This is written by a married couple, Rosamund Stone Zander and Benjamin Zander. Benjamin is the director of the Philharmonic Symphony, I believe, and his wife is a psychotherapist, but also a very creative person. And I did this book review several years ago, and it's been one of the most popular ones I've ever done. This book is infused. It's kind of one of those like standard self-help books, like multiple different principles that kind of make your life good. But they did such a great job of infusing their very extreme creativity into each of these principles and kind of a new spin on many of them. So uh, I loved reading this book. It was such a fun read and definitely a fresh take on a lot of the principles that so many self-help books hit on. Next up, The Checklist Manifesto: How to Get Things Right by Atul Gawande. I got another book of Atul Gawande right here. It's kind of hidden, Being Mortal. He's written a few books, but Atul Gawande was I believe, a general surgeon. So he's a physician, and he's kind of dedicated a lot of his time as a physician to studying how to improve patient outcomes and operational procedures and things like that. Now, the Checklist Manifesto was really written for healthcare, but it applies to so many things. And he actually uses examples of how checklists work for things like flying an airplane or a large scale construction project, where the checklist helps organize something that's overly complex into the simple things. And there are certain phases of a project where you should refer to the checklist because it's not a lack of intelligence, but when you are using your intelligent brain for something more complex, you tend to forget smaller things. So in the medical world, surgeons, though they be very smart and understand the significance of hand washing, often forget things like hand washing or sterile fields because they're too busy thinking about the damaged valve and how I'm going to enter the heart and how I'm going to, get this tool in there and the procedure and the time of the procedure, how long can I have them with a tourniquet and how long can I have them out and all these different factors that you want the physician thinking about, and then they forget to wash their hands and an infection arises and the patient's ill or dies, right? So a checklist can sort of help prevent those problems. One thing that I took away from that book was actually that nurse turnover dropped significantly in the hospital that they first implemented a checklist in surgery. So in the OR, they stop, they run through the checklist, they introduce everybody, they make sure they verify the right patient, the right joint, leg, whatever, and a few simple things, and then they start surgery. And just that thing alone improved satisfaction and morale in the OR. It improved the likelihood that someone would speak up if something was wrong, and turnover went way down. So a lot of benefits from that. We're kind of moving into leadership, as you can see. So, checklist manifesto, something for leaders to implement into their businesses. Start with Why by Simon Sinek. How great leaders inspire everyone to take action. Not the last episode, but the one before that was Simon Sinek's one of his other books called Infinite Game. This one, Start with Why. This is really a big piece of Simon's kind of passion for life, is helping people identify their why, start with why, and infuse that into everything you do, whether it's your business or your personal life. So, talking about people actually want to be a part of your why more than whatever it is you sell or do. So if you're a computer company, but you're trying to empower individuals or something like that, right? People want to be more a part of that why than they care that you sell that computer, because there's other options, right? I can get a computer in other places, but I want to be a part of this one because the why is very strong. And so he's an excellent person for leaders to kind of follow and understand. He's got a ton of great content online, where he gives great examples and speaks at seminars all the time. Good to Great: Why Some Companies Make the Leap and Others Don't, written by Jim Collins. This book was very interesting. This is a long-term study. Well, not super long. I think it was like over 5 years. I could be wrong on that. It's been a while since I read it, but it was a fairly large scale study at least. And they had multiple like students and things helping on coordinating this and understanding the data and the research and all this stuff. And they basically break down um, certain categories of businesses. So they try to find businesses that overlap in so many of their aspects, like say pharmacy stores, so Walgreens versus CVS versus Rite Aid versus a few others that meet the criteria. They look at their charts as far as like stock market and their financial performances and employee size and employee turnover, all this stuff. And then they try to pick out those companies that sort of broke out and did far better than those competitors who seemed to be in the exact same vein, and what was the difference between those companies that did break out and what he calls great companies versus all the good companies, right? So like it's like Rite Aid's a good company, but Walgreens far exceeded their projections for like a decade. And why is that, right? And so some of the things he talks about is like a level 5 leader. He explains what that is. First who, then what. So get the right people on the bus and then go achieve what you're trying to achieve, right? Good companies seem to have somewhat of an addiction to reorganizations and layoffs, while great companies almost never do. Great companies hire talent and find work for those talented people, versus good companies try to find people to fill holes in their talent pool or in their job descriptions. Next up, The Alliance: Managing Talent in the Network Age by Reid Hoffman. He's a co-founder of LinkedIn. He's written other books as well, but The Alliance, basically talking about the new age, the gig economy. So it's not 100% gig economy, but the gig economy still applies to typical old school employees. So companies can kind of assume that these employees are not going to stay around for decades. That's sort of a thing of the past. When you hear of someone being in a position for 15, 20 years, that's an anomaly. And a lot of us, you think back to the early manufacturing age, and it was sort of this deal between company and employee. You join our team, we'll take care of you while you take care of us, and then we'll still take care of you when you retire. There was certain benefits packages and stuff that sort of aligned those two parties. But as that kind of dynamic has fallen apart and companies have become addicted to pleasing shareholders and layoffs and things like that. Employees have also become less loyal and look for their next great opportunity. How can they make more money or find a more entertaining position or more freedom, things like that. So even when you're hiring an employee, you should look at that as like, this is a sort of a gig for you. How can I help you use this job to get your goals? And how can you help us achieve this status or these projects? Right. And so that's kind of the breakdown of the alliance and how you can make that work as an employer and as an employee. Extreme ownership. I don't believe I did a podcast episode on this. And so maybe I will in the future. But this is written by Jocko Willink. Um, how U.S. Navy SEALs lead and win. I did do an episode on Jocko's other book, Leadership Strategy and Tactics, right here. Jocko was a leader in the Navy SEALs, and he's a very famous podcaster and extreme ownership. I mean, it's in the title, basically saying take ownership for every aspect of your life. He does kind of hit on it in that book as well, where it's like if you're the leader of a platoon and something goes wrong, it's your fault. Well, actually, it was the gunner's fault. Well, if the gunner made a mistake because he was uneducated, that's your fault for not knowing that he was not educated or that for not teaching him, etc. Right? If the weather ruined your plans, well, it's still your responsibility to have a plan A and a plan B, a contingency for the weather not being right. Right. So, like everything in your life is your responsibility, your health, your money, your happiness, your family, your neighbors, like everything. You are in charge of making things work. How you respond to life is up to you. This one, I put it after Good to Great because this book, The Six Secrets of Change, What the Best Leaders Do to Help Their Organizations Survive and Thrive, written by Michael Fullen. So this book was quite interesting. He kind of just pulls a lot of research from multiple sources, and that's sort of how he put the book together. But he talks about how even in Good to Great, while it has some major aspects of truth in it, there are errors in the way we view leadership. And one takeaway that I took from this is I used to lean heavily in the side of treat your employees right and they will treat your customers right. Your business will thrive. You'll have less turnover, et cetera, which is true. I still believe that. But he sort of says, there you have passionate people about both ends, and the reality is the best companies and leaders are very balanced in that, where they view their employees and their customers with equal respect and equal value, which in the way he explains it, I was very sold on it, and I thought, well, that's probably true. If you lean too heavy in one direction or the other, you're leaving chips on the table. And a high functioning organization respects both. And so he of course has six secrets in leadership, how you can help a business thrive. Next up, Strengths Finder 2.0. This is written by Tom Rath and created by Gallup. You've ever heard of the Gallup surveys or Gallup polls? So these guys basically have broken down multiple personal traits and characteristics, and so you can sort of see what your personality types are. And there's a test online that you get a QR code or you get a coupon for that, and you go take the test online and see what your strengths are. I think I wrote mine here on the front. So my top 5: futuristic, maximizer, ideation, learner, individualization. And I took this probably 5 years ago, so I should maybe take another look at it. But very good for leaders as well, because you can sort of understand what makes people tick. If they are a futuristic type person, how could you utilize that characteristic to benefit your company versus putting someone who wants a lot of, freedom and variety in a job that's very much just like pull the lever, stay in your cubicle, don't talk or have ideas. Well, that, would obviously not be a good fit, and you don't want to make those mistakes in your organization. So understanding personality types and how to use them and communicate with them, it's a very valuable book for leaders. This is one of my all-time favorite books, Influencer: The Power to Change Anything. This is from the creators of Crucial Conversations, which is another great book, but there are 5 authors: Carrie Patterson, Joseph Grenny, David Maxfield, Ron McMillan, and Al Switzler. Uh, the idea on this book of this book is really good, right? How to change anything. And then they have these fantastic stories throughout the book, and they bounce between about 4 of them. How they tackled AIDS in Vietnam, how they tackled the guinea worm in New Guinea, how the Dr. Silverstein, I think is her name, Silverstein, created the dealency program here in the US, and a couple of others. And they sort of use those stories to illustrate all these principles that they're pulling out and how you can influence massive crowds to improve things. For example, reading in Mexico is one of them. How they made the masses become passionate about reading through these programs and radio shows and stuff, and it truly worked. And so they've managed to tackle massive programs with giant populations by executing these strategies. The Challenger Sale. This is written by Matthew Dixon and Brent Adamson, taking control of the customer conversation. So this was kind of like Good to Great. They sort of created this large scale study in trying to find data and understand what makes the best salespeople. And they broke them into about 5 different buckets. And I don't remember all of them. It was like the lone wolf, and there was the closer. I don't remember all of them, but one was like the lone wolf, right? Someone that likes to just kind of go out and do their own thing, um, versus like people who are much more subtle or kind or whatever. And the one that did the very best was the challenger. And what they define a challenger as is somebody who basically presents new information to their client about their market, and then provides a solution to uh, that dilemma. And so they're kind of a resource to the client, someone who's got new information, got a pulse on the market, touching lots of different people in the same niche. And then they can show up and offer me something, not only information and challenges I'm going to face, but solutions to those problems, and then how to execute that. And so it's like having an organization that supports those challengers, and that the sales process is not just set upon the shoulders of this single individual like the lone wolf, but rather it's a group, and it's more about the strategic approach of selling a company. My all-time favorite sales book, Never Split the Difference: Negotiating as if Your Life Depended on It, by Chris Voss. Chris Voss was an FBI hostage negotiator for about 14 years, and he had to negotiate with head chop and terrorists and things like that. He had a lot of life experience in this book, which made it both very entertaining and very, very valuable in the way the FBI found certain strategies to help them negotiate. And in the beginning, it was sort of like tit for tat, right? You give me a little, I'll give you a little. And in the end, you send out the hostage and we'll pay you $400,000. But that's not a very good system, because that kind of encourages terrorists to continue to do business. And so they found a way to basically get hostages out without paying any money. And Never Split the Difference, of course, is based on that. And so he's a phenomenal teacher, and the book is very, very good. I've actually used it a couple times in my own personal life in business, negotiating salary, negotiating priced for like sales booths at events, stuff like that. And it's turned into a fair bit of money for me. All right, next up is Chris Hogan's Everyday Millionaires: How Ordinary People Built Extraordinary Wealth and How You Can Too. I've actually been texting Chris and I got to get him on the podcast. But anyway, Chris, he used to work with Dave Ramsey, so he's in the financial coaching world. He's now doing other coaching as well, but and he's doing his own thing. But this book they wrote with the Ramsey group, and essentially this is a bunch of data of 10,000 millionaires and things in their life, and throughout the book he talks about strategies and methods and things, but he also gives like statistics throughout it where it says things like this: 92% of millionaires developed a long-term plan for their money compared to 60% of the general population. And so he just has statistics about things. 70% of millionaires saved more than 10% of their income throughout their working years. So there's a bunch of those kinds of things in here, and it kind of gives you an idea that actually the majority of millionaires in the country are ordinary people, had ordinary jobs. One thing that might surprise you is teachers were in like the top 10 industries for millionaires. We frequently talk about how teachers don't get paid enough, but when you take in the total package for what a teacher gets paid, it's actually quite competitive. It's 80, 90, $100,000. Their take home is very small. But the way teachers' salaries work is there's sort of this obligation to invest in retirement, and then also you get paid after retirement for your entire life. So teaching can actually work out quite well for you if you can survive on a smaller take home. It results in a lot of a pretty good retirement, and a lot of teachers are able to sort of retire young, go get another job or other things to make some money. So a lot of teachers are able to retire quite well. So, Everyday Millionaires, if you're curious what an everyday millionaire looks like, that's the book to read. So the next book is about real estate. It's called Get Free Houses by Austin Rutherford. The book was mediocre, but Austin himself is very active on Instagram and teaching people how to get free houses. And he literally has built a portfolio of over $15 million without using any of his own money. And essentially the strategy, it's called the Burr method, BRRRR, I think it is. And essentially what it is like find a great deal. You got to buy right? So you do a lot of hustling trying to find a good deal. You buy the house with private equity. So you go get a private money lender, you go purchase the house cash, you remodel the house, you rent it out, get a renter in there, and now it's a business asset in and of itself. So the income that the house is creating, it's like a business loan. And so the bank will finance the loan based on the income the property is generating. So if you bought right and you can rent it for enough money, now you should have a positive cash flow on the house. You could go to the bank and refinance it, get get that money to pay all your private money lenders back, and then you are in the house 20% equity without any of your own money. And so he gives you a lot of the details of how that happens and why you should be jumping into real estate. So the next 3 books are actually along that same vein. I haven't read 2 of these actually. So I did an episode on ABCs of real estate investing. Has been one of the most popular episodes on our show. So but it comes as a whole set. So you got tax-free wealth and ABCs of buying rental properties. So these go very well with Austin's book. But the ABCs of real estate investing was a very helpful book. And by the way, this is written by Ken McElroy, who is one of Robert Kiyosaki's like right-hand man. They do a lot of work together. And this is actually a Rich Dad Poor Dad advisor book. So this was a super valuable book to me in real estate. And I got into real estate a couple years ago. And so um, it was nice to sort of have a mapped out method of how I should be looking at properties, looking at realtors, looking at tax accountants, looking at property management companies, like how to perceive the market, where should I buy, what makes a good futuristic market plan, and things like that. And so he maps it all out. Very, very helpful book. This one's kind of on the other end of the spectrum. Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover. You probably heard of Dave Ramsey because he's kind of everywhere, but Um, I think my personal opinion on Dave Ramsey's methods for finances is if you're not interested in money, you don't like to talk about money, it kind of nags at you. You just want to go to your job and be able to retire one day quite well. Follow the Ramsey plan. He makes managing money very simple. Live on less than you earn, invest 10 to 15% of your money into mutual funds, create systems that work, and just live your life that way. And it's a great method to definitely retire wealthy if you have a decent career. And by decent, I mean very, very average, mediocre for 30 to 40 years, right? And that's the Dave Ramsey plan. On the other hand, if you want to be very involved with your money and try investing and learning markets and things like that. Two books that I would recommend. One is The Warren Buffett Way, which I don't think I did a review on, and so I need to pull that out. Another one here is The Cash Flow Quadrant, or his other book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. This is Robert Kiyosaki. Cash Flow Quadrant basically breaks down um, four different areas of being a money maker, right? So one is just being an employee where you trade your time for money. One is being a small business owner where you're still trading your time for money, but you own the business so you could potentially hire employees and things like that that start to earn you money. You also have some like tax advantage by being a business owner. So you get to spend your money first and then be taxed on what's left versus the employee who gets to be taxed on all their money and then spend what's left, right? And then you get over to like the investor side and being somebody that owns major assets. And so being in real estate, as some of those other books describe, if you're in real estate, you own the asset, the money is coming from the tenant that then comes to your bank account. You pay the mortgage, but you also get to keep some of if you're positive cash flowing. Now you control the money, you control the property, you have assets that are growing in wealth, etc. And so that's really one where you want to get to is being an investor. And so there's actually four quadrants. I only explained three, but this book is very, very good about helping you understand like balance sheets and what is a truly an asset and what is not. So the house you live in is an expense. A house you own that is rented is an asset. So an asset puts money in your pocket, an expense takes it out. So Cash Flow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki. A couple that I'll just mention that I actually did fairly recently, so I won't bring them down. But Atomic Habits, which is always up here behind me, I love that book. Why We Sleep, incredible book about the health benefits or cost of health if you're not sleeping well, but the benefits of sleeping 8 hours a day are astronomical, from the neuro biology in your brain to your athleticism to your alertness, your driving, uh, the duration at which you can live without Alzheimer's, all kinds of things like that. So that was a phenomenal book. So anyway, I hope that you find a book or two in here that you would like to read. These are all great books. And let me know what you think of this version of the podcast. Maybe we'll do a few more of these, every quarter or so to sort of recap a number of books if you're looking for one. I know we have a lot of new listeners, so I wanted to refer you to some of the books that we've talked about on the podcast. These are some of my favorites, and hopefully you can refer back to many of those episodes and enjoy some good listening or purchase. I'll put links to these books in the show notes, so maybe you can purchase from Amazon and enjoy these books yourself. So anyway, thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.